A pleasant day, Mrs. Rodney and my Action Learning cohort. My name is Roxcian Moore and I'm a proud mathematics major. And I'll also be your presenter for this presentation. All right, before we jump into the meat of the matter, I want to warm you guys up with a starter activity. All right, so the starter activity, as you can see, I have some fun research quotes. So I want you guys to write down which quote number or numbers in which you find extremely funny. All right, so let's get into it. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to grab that pencil. Let's go. So, stalking is such a strong word. I prefer intense research of an individual. So if you find that funny, please write down that number, and that number is 1. Number 2, if I say, first of all, run away, because I have prepared research, data, charts, and I will totally prove you wrong. Number 3, research is what I'm doing when I don't know what I'm doing. Interesting, huh? All right, number 4, to steal ideas from one person is plagiarism. To steal from many is research. Number 5, if at first you don't succeed, search, and search again. That's why we call it research. Number 6, despite my 30 years research into the woman's soul, I have not yet been able to answer the great question that has never been answered. What does a woman really want? And finally, number 7, a jealous woman does better research than the FBI. So any of these quotes in which you agree to, please write down that number. Moving on. About the presentation. The sole purpose of this presentation is to provide me with the opportunity to present the results of my needs assessment in which I conducted. First and foremost, can't we all agree that mathematics is seen as one of the most significant subjects worldwide in spite of an individual's level of education or sovereign state? I believe we all can agree, right? With that being acknowledged, the needs assessment in which I conducted was deeply influenced by a group of grade 7 students deserting performance in the area of geometry on the properties of quadrilaterals on their end of year mathematics examination. And as a result of this, the needs assessment topic, the effectiveness of this concrete pictorial abstract, in other words, the CP approach in correcting problematic topics faced by grade 7 students in the area of geometry at a high school in Jamaica, was coined. Objectives. By the end of my presentation, you should be able to understand the purpose of the needs assessment. You should also be able to be familiar with the needs assessment questions that were utilized to guide the needs assessment process. You should be able to gain a solid understanding of the data collection process, and this includes the instruments, the participants, ethical considerations, and of course the timeline. You should also be presented with the results obtained from the needs assessment and the conclusions drawn from the results obtained. Finally, you should be able to be educated on the intervention selected to minimize the problem identified. What is needs assessment? Ordopedia 2018 indicates that a need assessment is an organized plan of action that is used to discover needs as well as to determine both their causes and nature, and use that uncovered information to create a plan of action. The purpose of this needs assessment is to investigate the problem, as in whether or not this problem truly or really exists. Also to utilize suitable intervention to minimize the problem identified. Also to explore specific challenges that the students may encounter. And finally, the main purpose is to devise a plan of action to incorporate the use of the CP approach to minimize the problem. And this approach I will further elaborate on further in the video. Needs assessment questions. The needs assessment was guided by the following questions. The first question is as follows. How effective is the CP approach as opposed to conventional learning as it relates to students' performance in mathematics? The second question, what are students' attitudes towards mathematics? And third, and finally, what factors affect students' interest in mathematics? Methodology. The research sample consisted of 32 grade 7 learners from ABC High School in Jamaica, and this includes both male and female. First and foremost, a document review was conducted. Sage 2020 indicates that a document review is a data collection method where data is accumulated through the reviewing of existing documents. This method was chosen in order to gain access to data regarding grade 7's performance on their end of semester mathematics examination in search of a mathematical problem in which to base the needs assessment on. Based on the document review conducted, it was observed that students may have multiple misconceptions as it relates to the geometric topic, the properties of quadrilaterals. Instruments. Pretest. A pretest was selected as an effective data source to assess students' understanding of various concepts relating to the properties of quadrilaterals. The pretest was designed to validate whether or not this problem truly exists. I designed a pretest to reveal general misconceptions and errors associated with the properties of quadrilaterals. Some general misconceptions and errors associated with the properties of quadrilaterals are: students may lack prior knowledge of formulas associated with quadrilaterals. Students may implement incorrect formulas for finding the area of quadrilaterals. Students may fail to recognize the perception properties of quadrilaterals, such as the sum of interior angles. Also, students may fail to distinguish types of quadrilaterals. They may overlook the essentialness of parallel lines, make mistakes when calculating quadrilaterals, angles, and sides, and also they may forget to add the units after calculating the area of quadrilaterals. For this study, the quasi-experiment research design was utilized, and 2 groups of students from grade 7 class of the ABC High School was employed. The 2 groups that were employed were the CPA group and the non-CPA group, otherwise known as a conventional learning group, in which were the experimental group and the control group, respectively. Both groups indeed participated in the pretest. Each student was also given a questionnaire where they engaged in a survey to diagnose students' attitude and interest, in which aligns with the needs assessment questions 2 and 3. Sample of questionnaire used. The questionnaire has a total of 8 questions, where 2 are open-ended and the remaining 6 are closed-ended questions. If you look keenly at each question, you will realize that they are structured to collect data that align with the needs assessment questions 2 and 3. One of the instruments that was also used was, according to Audiopedia 2016, an observation is a live collection of data from primary source. Observation can be qualitative, where the absence or presence of something is recorded, or quantitative, once a number is attached to a phenomenon being observed, respectively. During this intervention, quantitative observation was utilized as a data source to collect data on students on the number of students who attempted and complete specific questions on various sections on the pre-test and post-test, and their total marks they received for each section. Additionally, qualitative observation was utilized as a data source to formulate hypotheses and to make conclusions based on each student's performance on the pre-test. So speaking about the observation checklist, here's a sample, as you can see to the left, of the observation checklist that was used. And this checklist works side by side with the pre-test to the right, as you can see. So basically what you're seeing before you are the learning objectives from the observation checklist. It is asking for you to distinguish quadrilaterals and the questions to the extreme left of the table. Question number 1A, 1B, 1C, and it aligns with each question from the pre-test. So as you can see, if you look at the pre-test, students were asked to calculate the area of the quadrilaterals in figure 1 below. And if you looked at the observation checklist, number 1 said, distinguish quadrilaterals. So the observation checklist, along with the pre-test, aligns with needs assessment 1, because it was specifically designed to determine the misconceptions students might have as it relates to the properties of quadrilaterals. Also, speaking about the pre-test, the students will also be given a post-test, which is the exact copy of the pre-test after the intervention, to determine whether or not they have learned something. So first they were given a pre-test. They were split in 2 groups, the CPA group and the non-CPA group. The CPA group was placed in a classroom upstairs, while the non-CPA group was placed in a classroom downstairs, in which they were taught conventionally, while the CPA group, they were taught about the properties of quadrilaterals using the CPA approach. And of course, after comparing both the pre-test and the post-test and the students' performance from the CPA group versus the students' performance from the non-CPA group, of course, you can see it will align with the needs assessment question 1. The sample of the observation checklist continues, as well as the pre-test. Okay, so this is some sample of the students' performance on the pre-test. So this is the first question. We're looking at 3 students' work, and we're looking at question 1A. It asks the students to calculate the area of the quadrilateral. There are 5 figures in the box, and students attempted all 5. What a quadrilateral is and the properties, they would have known that the triangle is a quadrilateral as well as the circle. So they would instead calculate the area of the square, the trapezium, and the rhombus. But they did not do so. So it is evident that some form of misconception lies right there. Earlier, some general misconceptions of properties of quadrilaterals, and they are evident in these students' work. Some students forget to write the correct unit. It is obvious that students are not familiar with the formulas for finding the area of quadrilaterals. Instead, it seems as if they are adding just the sides. This is a sample of a student's performance on question 2A, and this question was specifically designed to determine if students are familiar with certain terms as it relates to the properties of quadrilaterals. For this question, question 3B, and not just this question, but I've noticed that majority of the students is either they avoid from answering the question that asks them to explain, or they do something similar to what this individual did. Finally, an interview schedule was also utilized, where an interview was conducted with the maths teacher, in other words, my cooperative teacher, for the grade 7 group selected in regards to students' mathematics achievements and attitudes towards mathematics, and their thoughts on how effective will the CP approach will be towards students' understanding of concepts of the properties of quadrilaterals. Aligns with the needs assessment question 2. Process of data analysis. So basically the data was analyzed both quantitatively and qualitatively, from which opinions were formulated and conclusions were indeed made as it relates to students' level of participation in their mathematics classes and their attitudes towards mathematics. Also, descriptive statistics was used to analyze the results obtained from the study. We are aware that when conducting research, it involves the handling of data in which needs to be secure. So with that being said, let us look at some ethical considerations. Another Academic 2020 indicates that ethics is not an afterthought, neither is it a side note to the research study, but instead it is an integral aspect of the research that needs to remain at the forefront of our work. The purpose of ethics during data collection is that it preserves the integrity of the research. It also preserves the identity of and responses given by participants. Some ethical considerations that were addressed were confidentiality and anonymity, informed consent, and of course, voluntary participation. Confidentiality and anonymity. The pre-test and the questionnaires were specifically designed to exclude from requesting personal information from participants. Participants were encouraged to refrain from writing their names on the instrument. The pseudonym ABC High School was used for the school's name instead of the school's actual name. Informed consent. Consent forms were issued to parents, and this was because the students were below the age of 18. Terms of the needs assessment and research were reiterated through bullet points as well. Their parents were asked to write their full name, the child's name, and sign and put the date of the signature. Voluntary participation was also promoted, where the participants were enlightened about the purpose of the needs assessment, the objectives, and what it entails. Participants were not pressured to provide their immediate responses and consent. Also, participants were informed that they are free to withdraw if they so desire at any given period of time. Results prior to the intervention. Pie chart and a bar graph. Below the bar graph and the pie chart, it is showing that the average score on the pre-test was 43%, and the mode score was 36%, and the range of the scores obtained was 7% to 51%, and this is very disheartening. And it is evident that students indeed have a misconception. Look at the bar graph. To the right, you'll notice that below, you will see question 1A, 1B, 1C, all the questions that were presented on the pre-test. And as I mentioned earlier, the pre-test and the observation checklist work side by side. And the highest mark on the observation checklist was 4. At question 3A, it is showing that the highest score obtained was on question 3A, and the score was 2 out of 4. Some students scored 0 out of 4 on questions like question 1B, question 2B, question 4B, and 4C. And these questions were questions that actually asked the students to explain, in which they avoid from doing. To the left is a pie chart which shows a percentage of scores that are above as well as below 50%. This is showing that 32 students receive a pass mark that is over 50%, while 29 out of the 32 students receive a grade that is below 50%. So indeed, there was a problem that needs to be addressed. Results continue. If you look at the left, you'll see a table, and a table is showing students' responses from close-ended questions that were extracted from the questionnaire issue. The first question asks, do you think mathematics is important? The option was either yes or no, where 30 students out of the 32 said yes. However, 2 selected the option no. Question 3 asks students to select the option that best describes the way they view mathematics. Now, 1 individual said it was okay, 1 person said it was easy, 18% said mathematics is boring, 1 claimed that maths is fun, 31 claimed that it is stressful, 28 students claimed that it is extremely difficult, while 11 said that it is scary. So in conclusion, majority of the students are aware that mathematics is indeed important, of course. However, majority of the students negatively perceive mathematics as they believe that this is something that induces stress. Also, almost 50% of the students selected 1 as their level of participation in mathematics classes, which is indeed the lowest. So the proposed intervention is the concrete pictorial abstract, in other words, a CP approach. What is the CP approach? According to Maths No Problem, the CP approach is a strategy designed by Jerome Bruner. Maths No Problem 2021 further educates that in Singapore, which is the highest performing country in mathematics, the effectiveness of the CP approach within mathematics teaching and learning make it such an essential technique that the Ministry of Education will avoid from passing any teaching material that exclude the approach. So the CP and the A from the abbreviation CPA each represents one of the 3 stages of the approach. Maths No Problem further indicates that these 3 stages are the concrete, the pictorial, and the abstract stage. The concrete stage, otherwise known as the doing stage, is a stage which encourages the manipulation of physical objects to model problems. As it relates to the pictorial stage, otherwise known as the seeing stage, this is a stage where visual representation of concrete objects are used to model problems. During the pictorial stage, learners would make mental connection between the physical object in which they would interact with during the concrete stage and the abstract pictures, diagrams, or models that represent the objects from the problem. The third and final stage, the abstract stage, otherwise known as a symbolic stage, this is a stage where learners use abstract symbols to model problems. The abstract stage is a stage where the abstract content are introduced to the learner by the teacher. During this stage, the teacher will introduce learners to the concept at a symbolic level, and this involved the use of mathematical symbols, numbers, and notations. Benefits of the CP approach. Maths No Problem 2021 indicates that some benefits of the CP approach is that it has the potential to develop a deep and sustainable understanding of mathematics in learners. It also has the potential to build on learners' prior knowledge. It is an effective framework to enhance learners' understanding of abstract concepts. It also involves concrete materials and pictorial, in other words, representational diagrams. The CP approach is also able to bring concepts to real life by allowing students to experience and handle physical objects. The target group in which the intervention, the CP approach, will be implemented on is a group of grade 7 learners, both male and female. The time frame is for 4 weeks period. So this is a table that shows the breakdown of the time frame. Week 1, so I spent the first 2 days obtaining consent to review students' performance on their end of year examination test papers. So during these 2 days, I spent conducting the document review in search of the mathematical problem in which to base the needs assessment on. And this was indeed successful. And I conclude that students seem to have a major misconception with the properties of quadrilaterals. Day 3, I review students' performance on the end of year examination to determine the problematic topic. And it was indeed successful, and the research topic was coined. Therefore, I spent formulating some additional research topic to see which one is the more suitable one. And I created at least 2 research questions. Therefore, I spent formulating some research questions, and I wanted to create at least 2, but I was unsuccessful as I only managed to create 1. Day 5 to 7, I created pending research questions. Week 2, day 1, I shared the needs assessment plan with my supervisor, in which she passed, and I was successful. Supervisor comments, love the idea for the CP approach. Day 2 to 5 of week 2, I decide on the most suitable data collecting instruments for the needs assessment plan. And then I create the questionnaire interviews, schedule pre-test and observational checklists. I was successful. I created lesson plan that incorporates the CP approach on day 6 to 7. And I also create a lesson plan that excludes the approach. Day 4 to 7, I analyze the data collected from the instruments. I also managed to administer the lessons on the properties of quadrilaterals that incorporates the CP approach. And I also managed to carry a lesson that exclude the CP approach for the students who were in the non-CPA approach group. On week 4, I also managed to administer the pending lessons. The results obtained after the intervention. So I compared both the results from the CPA group of students and the results obtained from the students that were in the non-CPA group. The results revealed that out of the 32 students, 14 of the students received over 50% on the post-test, which is the exact copy of the pre-test. Majority of the students who received over 50% were from the CPA group of students. The majority that received below 50% was from the non-CPA group. So the pie chart to the right is showing the mean, in other words, the average performance for both groups. So the results reveal that the non-CPA group, their average performance is 45%, while for the CPA group, their average performance is 85%. That says a lot. Am I right? Also, we're looking at the bar graph. The bar graph to the left showed the non-CPA group, the mode score for each question on the post-test. So for question 1A, the mode score is 1 out of 4. For 1B, 0 out of 4. Same for 2B and 3B and 4B and 4C. For 1C, the mode score is 2. In contrast to the CPA group where the mode score is 4. And look at question 1B and 2B and 3B and 4B and 4C for the CPA group. That's a great improvement in contrast to the results from the non-CPA group. Look at question 4A on the non-CPA group chart. Their highest score overall is 2 marks out of 4, and that's for question 1C, 2A, and 4A. But as it relates to those questions on the CPA group bar graph, the highest score is 4. So again, that says a lot. And if you notice, in particularly, question 4B, 4C, 3B, 2B, 1B are the questions that actually ask students to explain. And students from the conventional group, in other words, the non-CPA group, even though they were taught properties of quadrilateral, they still face difficulty in explaining. And that is why the results show that the mode score is 0 out of 4. In contrast to the CPA group, students managed to explain for question 4B, 4C, 2B, and 1B. So that's a major improvement right there. In final analysis, the results of the research shows that as it relates to the post-test, students who were placed in the non-CPA group, in other words, a conventional learning group, they indeed displayed an average level of performance on the test, in comparison to those learners who were placed in the CPA group, who displayed an above an average level of performance. And in fact, students under the CPA group performed outstandingly higher in comparison to those under the non-CPA group in the post-test. However, both groups' level of performance in the pre-test was below average. In conclusion, this signifies that the CP approach is indeed more effective than conventional learning. And this brings us into the evaluation of the effectiveness of the CPA approach. So the effectiveness of this approach will be evaluated as after the needs assessment, both groups of students will be given a post-test, which is a duplicate of the pre-test, and each group of students' performance will be compared, as well as their performance on the pre-test will be compared with their performance on the post-test. Reflection. My experience in preparing this presentation was a bittersweet experience. The bitter aspect of this presentation has to do with mostly with the time frame. It was so much to cover during a short period of time. It was hectic, spending a long time teaching at an institution and to arrive home just to prepare this presentation. However, I managed to be successful with the grace of God and proper time management skills. I ensure I did what I can manage each day instead of procrastinating and waiting on the last minute moment. Adding to this, I also faced a major challenge carrying out the needs assessment, as during this process, the school in which I was assigned took a while to resume to face-to-face teaching and learning. Due to this, I have to wait for days to carry out certain aspects of my needs assessment. Nevertheless, I've learned that the research process requires observations, ethical considerations, resources, proper preparations, effective time management skills, plan of actions, as well as a topic of interest to drive that motivation. In final analysis, I strongly believe that the proposed intervention, the CP approach, indeed has the potential to stop students from failing and fearing mathematics. Just to conclude with a quote by William Paul Thurston, mathematics is not about numbers, equations, computations, or algorithms. It's about understanding. And each stage of the CP approach is seasoned with the ingredients of understanding. Thank you. And this is the end of my presentation. Here's my references. Have a wonderful day.